So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about density for those of you studying on the test and you're having a hard time remembering maybe. Density, it's a little bit of a confusing concept, but if you really think about it and we think about things that we feel and things that we can actually put our hands on, it actually makes a lot of sense. So density is when I have two things that are the same size, like these two bricks. Remember we did the brick demonstration? And this brick is heavier than this brick even though they're the same size. The reason is because one is more dense. Okay, so what does that actually mean? So density is the measure of how much mass there is in a certain volume. So the way that we calculate density is by dividing the mass of something by its volume. Okay? So for instance, I have these two bricks. They're both about the same size. They both have a length of 20.5 centimeters, a width of 9 centimeters, and a height of 6.5 centimeters. Okay? So they're both about the same size. So I want to know how much volume do these bricks take up. So if I multiply the length times the width times the height, that's going to tell me what the volume of these bricks are. So volume, the way we calculate volume is by taking length times width times height. Okay? And that's going to basically tell me how big is this thing. Okay? I've measured the length, the width, and the height. And how big, if I can put one number to how big this is, that's my volume. How much space does this take up? So if I multiply this times this times this, I get a volume of 1,199.25 cubic centimeters. Okay, so this number tells me how big this brick is. Okay, so we know 1/2 of this. So if density equals the mass divided by the volume, we already know the volume of these bricks. Okay, we know that each brick is about 1,199.25 cubic centimeters. That's how much space it takes up. But to know what its density is, we also need to know what is the mass. Okay, so I'm going to take a digital scale here. I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to weigh each of these. So we're going to call this brick number 2. This one that's less shiny, brick number 1. So I'm going to weigh brick number 1, and it is about 732 grams. So here's brick number 1. $732 grams. So that's its mass. How much does it weigh? It weighs 732 grams. We know its volume is 1,199. Okay? So what we want to find out is the density. So what is the density of brick number 1? It weighs, okay, the mass of it is 732 grams. The volume is 1,199.25. So to find the density, equals mass divided by volume. So my mass is 732 divided by my volume, 1,199.25. Okay, so if I divide these two, 732 divide 1,199.25, I get 0.61. Okay, and that's grams per cubic centimeter. Okay, and the reason I put this and this is because my density is my mass divided by my volume. My mass is measured in grams. My volume is measured, in cubic centimeters. So I divide this and this, but I can't divide these because they're not like terms, right? They're not the same type of measurement. So I just leave them grams over cubic centimeters. So this tells us that there is 0.61 grams for every cubic centimeter of this. Okay? So if I chop this up into little tiny centimeter blocks, each one of them would weigh 0.61 grams. Okay? So now let's do this. Let's see what the density of brick 2 is. Okay, so let's weigh brick number 2. And brick 2 is only 42 grams. I'm sorry, 46 grams. Okay, so here we can already see it's kind of weird because these bricks are the same size, but one weighs 732 grams and one only weighs 46. So this one is a lot lighter. Okay, so that's because of density. So let's figure out, let's put a number to the density of brick number 2. So the mass is 46 grams. The volume is 1,000. It's the same because they're the same size, 199.25 cubic centimeters. Okay, so now density, again, mass divided by volume. So my mass is 46. My volume is 1,199.25. Okay, so in my calculator on my iPad, if I say 46 divide by this, it's going to give me a density of, I'm probably off the screen over here, so my density is 0.03 grams per cubic centimeter. Okay, so this is telling me that one block, if I were to chop it up into teeny tiny parts, into centimeter sized cubes, each cube would weigh 0.61 grams. This brick, if I were to chop it up into cubes, each one would be 0.03 grams. Okay? So this one is much heavier than this one, even though they're the same size. So it's a little bit confusing to think about why that is, but if we look at a little model like this, if we were to be able to look at the bricks with our NanoVision goggles, if we were to be able to see the little particles that make up the bricks, they would look something like this. So you can see, if I hold these like this, they're about the same size. But this brick, the heavier brick, has a lot more particles packed into that same amount of space. Where this brick, so this would be brick number 2, this would be brick number 1. Brick number 2 is the same size, but there's more space between the particles. There's not as many particles crammed in there. Okay? So if there's more particles in brick 1, that's why we're going to see the mass be so much more. And in brick 2, there are less particles and they're more spaced out, so there's not as much stuff inside of this brick. Right? There's a lot more space where there's no matter. Okay? So that's why this one is going to weigh a lot less, because, again, if we look at both of these, this one has a lot of particles in there. Okay? This one does not have very many particles at all, so there's not as much stuff there to weigh. So density is a measure of how much matter is inside of something. So if this is brick number 1, we see that it has more density. It has more particles packed inside of it. Brick number 2 is the same size, but there's a lot more space. Okay, so that's why this one is heavier and has a higher number for its density. This one is lighter, has a lower number for its density because it is not as densely packed with particles. Okay? So again, when we're calculating density, we're dividing mass by volume. And I think the best way to think about density is if we're holding two things of the same size, one is heavier, this one's heavier, but they're the same size, this one has more particles packed. It is more densely packed with particles than this one. So that's why it's so much heavier. There's more matter inside of this brick than there is inside of this brick.